All right, everyone. Jeremy Knauff here with another episode of the Public Relations Declassified live stream. And we're going to be unpacking a topic that I think doesn't get enough attention, and that is 7 things that you should never say during your TV interview. Now, this is one of those things where there's obvious things that you shouldn't say, things that everybody realizes they absolutely should not say, right? Obviously, even if you're me, you're not going to get on a TV interview and start dropping the F-bomb, right? That's obviously not viable. But there's a lot of other things that you can say that can actually hurt the perception that people have of you, right? Have a negative public relations impact for you. And this happens far more often than people realize because there are very subtle things that you can say that can really screw things up. In fact, it's funny, I posted about this episode yesterday afternoon, and good friend and client of mine, David Bell, actually commented on that post saying, "I always need this advice," which I thought was kind of hilarious. But the reality is there are so many things that sound innocent, but when you say them, it creates a negative perception of you and your brand. So we want to avoid these things. Now, there's a lot of ways that an interview can go wrong. I'm going to actually pull up what I consider to be a hilarious clip of an interview gone wrong.
Well, to those voters, okay, so you...
I don't want to keep doing this. I'm going to call it. Okay. Thank you.
You're not going to do the interview with us?
Nope, not like this. I'm not. Not with 7 follow-ups to every single question you ask.
Hey, you wanted this, right? You wanted the real deal? That's what this is. Wake up. You're in the middle of it.
So obviously that's an example of how things could go wrong really fast in a very big way. And there's a lot more to that particular interview that was really bad. But what we're going to be talking about today are 7 of the more subtle things that you could potentially say that will hurt the perception that people have of you. And the first, and this is going to sound a little bit crazy until I get a chance to explain it, but it's "I think" or "I believe." Now, on the surface, it sounds totally fine, right? Say, "I think this," or "I believe that." But the reality is, when you say that, you're demonstrating a lack of certainty. Now, there are cases where "I think" or "I believe" makes sense, where it is something you can say. And it's a very small subset of the type of topics that you can respond with that as part of your answer. And where that would apply is if you're making a prediction, you're talking about, how a particular piece of legislation in your industry may play out, or, what the trends in your industry are indicating, or where things may go, something like that. That's a case where it makes sense to say, "I think X, Y, Z." On the other hand, if somebody asks you, what's the best approach to using artificial intelligence in your business? Well, you don't want to say, "I think," right? If you're an AI professional and you're out here giving advice, you're a consultant, you're helping people set up AI systems in their business. Well, it's not "I think." It's, "Well, here's what we do in our consultancy when we're working with a client, blah, blah, blah." You're explaining the best practices. You're explaining your process. You're explaining what works, what doesn't. There's no room for "I think" in there. The only time you want to use "I think" or "I believe" is if it's a thing where there is no definitive answer. You're doing what you do, whatever industry you happen to be in. We're using AI for this example, but whatever you do for a client, you're doing that based on knowledge. It's not a hunch. It's not a gut feel. You're doing what you know will have the most impact. You're doing what you do every day. You have a particular process. You have that process for a reason, right? If you're telling people, we have to do this audit and figure out where your problems are, what issues are you trying to fix with AI? That's all data-based advice. So leave "I think" out of the picture and focus on the data. The only time you want to say "I think" or "I believe" or anything of that nature is if it's something where there's a prediction involved, right? You're talking about what you think may happen in some particular scenario. But when you're talking about the right approach to something, if you're talking about what people should do, you're talking about best practices in your industry, never say "I think" or I believe. Another thing you should never say when it's possible to avoid them is any kind of filler words like, right, things like that. Now, I will admit, all of us are guilty of this from time to time. I'm on TV fairly regularly. I'm doing my live stream every week. Like, I'm in front of a camera a lot. And even I will occasionally use filler words. In my case, the one that I really hate is right. Like, sometimes I will end a statement with right. And there's some psychology behind that. But when you're using too much of a filler word or a combination of filler words, then it starts to dilute your message. It starts to make you look less confident. It makes it look like you're not quite sure what to say. So you're filling the space. You're just trying to keep things moving. And so you're injecting these filler words because you don't have the actual valuable, useful words that are going to convey your message. Now, this is not a thing you're just going to flip a switch and all of a sudden everything goes away and you just completely stop using filler words. They exist because we are not supercomputers. We do not have every single piece of data. We do not have every possible answer that we can give to every possible question. We're humans. So you're going to have this to some degree. The key is going back through all of your TV interviews, all of your podcast interviews, when you're on stage even. Go back through, and we had something in the military called an after action report, right? After a mission, after some sort of operation, we would then go back through and reverse engineer the entire situation, right? What did we get right? What did we get wrong? Where could we have improved? Where are the problems? Where are the bottlenecks? Where can we communicate better to ensure that this flows smoother? Take the same approach to every single media opportunity, whether it's a TV segment, whether it's a stage opportunity, whether it's you being interviewed on a podcast. Go back through and listen to it and start counting the filler words, the ums, the ahs, the like, the right, all of the things that you could potentially be saying that are just filling dead space. And the other side of that is people are uncomfortable with dead space. The reality is, when you have some dead space from time to time, it can create a lot more impact. Now, some of you may have noticed, especially if you've got some media training, you've done a fair amount of podcasting, you've done a fair amount of TV interviews, things like that. You may have noticed that I intentionally injected a little bit more space there. Creates a little more of a dramatic effect. It makes people kind of lean in, figuratively, not physically, but they lean in a little bit. What's he pausing for? What's he going to say next? This must be important, right? Why else would he pause? Filler tends to make most people uncomfortable, and that's why they use these filler words, right? There's a pause, nobody's saying anything. They feel like they should be saying something, so they just start filling it with noise. And that's all that it is. It's just noise, and it detracts from your overall message. So the only way to get good at this, to get good at removing this, to eliminating it from your speech patterns, is to go through after an interview, identify where it's happening, and start making conscious efforts to eliminate that. And the best way to do that, once you've gone through and analyzed a media interview, is to consciously be aware of it and consciously practice, right? Go on more podcasts. Go try to get more TV opportunities. The more that you do this, the more natural that it will become. The next one we're going to talk about is the phrase, everyone knows. And there are cases where this could be somewhat useful, but for the most part, you want to avoid saying things like everyone knows. And the reason for that is everyone knows is a bullshit phrase. No, everyone doesn't know. And if they did, what's the point of bringing it up? Now, there is a scenario where it can be useful, more of a propaganda, less of a PR for business type of scenario. But it's for generating consensus when consensus doesn't actually exist. So in a lot of cases, people will say, oh, well, everyone already knows that. You see this a lot in politics, hence why I brought up propaganda. You'll see a lot of people say, well, everyone knows that socialism is more fair. Well, no, everyone doesn't know that because it's demonstrably false, evident in the hundreds and hundreds of millions of people who are dead as a result of socialist type policies. They say it as a way to create false consensus. But when you say it in a business context, everyone knows that AI is a game changer in business. Well, no, everyone doesn't know that. And frankly, it's not necessarily true. AI can be a game changer in business, but not if you're using it in the way that most people do. Most people have no clue how to properly implement AI. In fact, one of our community members, Tatiana Zagorski, talks about that a ton. She talks about the importance of having a strategy, about using it properly, and not just using it to use it, but look for the areas where it can actually create a measurable improvement in your business. That's the right way to do it. So in no scenario would she ever come out and say, everyone knows AI is a game changer, because it's not true. And even if it were true, it's a meaningless statement, because if everyone did know it, then there's no point in bringing it up. So this is just, generally speaking, I would put this kind of in a category of filler words, because it doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't provide any value, but it can actually detract from your message. Because if you say everyone knows XYZ, and I'm watching your TV interview and I'm thinking, well, shit, I don't know XYZ. Well, now I've already dismissed you because you have contradicted my worldview. And that's just the nature of human psychology. That's how people think. That's how people operate. So we want to avoid saying everyone knows, and instead get to the meat of what you're actually trying to say. So rather than saying everyone knows AI is a game changer, you might say something like, look, AI can be a game changer for the businesses who implement it correctly. And here's how we do it, or here's how I do it, or how I've done it, whatever. The idea is you're demonstrating the substance of the argument and not just assuming that everyone knows this thing that you're claiming, because it's not true. The next one is, what I can say is ... Right? What comes after that? Well, whatever comes after that is bullshit. When I say, so a journalist asks me a question, I don't answer that question. I say, well, what I can say is ... And you see politicians do this all the time. You also see it fairly frequently in the business world when an executive or a spokesperson is dealing with a PR crisis. Has anyone died from using your product? Well, what I can say is ... right? Whatever comes after that is essentially meaningless. What you're admitting is essentially, I can't answer that question because it will make me look bad. So instead, I'm going to tell you this other thing in hopes that it deflects you and gets you going down some other rabbit hole. So it damages your credibility. It makes it sound like you're hiding something. It makes it sound like there's something that you haven't talked about. There's something, or that rather that you're not going to talk about, that you're not willing to talk about. But instead, let me give you this other tidbit of information in hopes that it will distract you enough that we can move on to something else. So avoid saying that. If they ask you a question, give them a direct answer and a real answer, something that actually answers the question, not just something that has words spewing out of your word hole. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is, I'll be honest. And I hate this one with a passion, because what the fuck were you being before? If you're saying, I'll be honest, or let me be honest with you, now what you're implying is everything that I've said up to this point is subject to being false. Maybe I've lied. Maybe I've omitted something. Maybe I have allowed you to go down a particular assumption that's not necessarily true. When you're saying this, you're essentially telling people that what I said prior to this particular statement was not me being honest. And that's a great way to make yourself look like a dishonest douchebag. And we want to avoid that. We want to be honest, forthcoming, and more than honesty is transparency. So this is one of those very nuanced elements here. So, have you embezzled money from your company? No, I've never embezzled money from my company. If that person had never embezzled money from his particular company, then that would technically be honest. But let's say that person had instead embezzled money from a nonprofit that he runs. Well, if you're being transparent, you would say, no, I've never embezzled money from my company, but I have embezzled money from this nonprofit that I run. That's the difference between honesty and transparency. And so we want to be very clear on things like that. Another one we're going to unpack is no comment. Look, guys, unless your career started in Langley and you're doing work for the government that no one knows about, no comment is not really a viable option. What you're telling them is that there's something shady, there's something sinister, there's something dishonest that you don't want to disclose. When you're saying no comment, it makes you look bad. The reality is, if they're asking a question, you need to answer that question. Saying no comment doesn't win you any favors. It just makes you look dishonest. And I will admit, there are going to be cases where there's some things you can't say for whatever reason. Maybe there's an ongoing legal battle. Maybe there's an investigation of some sort pending, whatever the case may be. Rather than saying no comment, what you may say is, my lawyers have advised me not to comment on that while we're in the middle of the legal proceedings, but I'm more than happy to discuss it at length once we've finalized this legal matter and it's come to a conclusion. Now you're telling them why you can't tell them, and you're also telling them that you are going to come back and give them the real answers when the time is right. And it's not just that you're not answering, you're not telling them the whole story because you don't want to. You're telling them the story because of certain legitimate reasons. So an ongoing investigation is a perfect example of that. You'll see this a lot with law enforcement. You'll see this a lot in the legal field. You'll see it a lot with product recalls. There's going to be cases where we don't yet have all of the information. So commenting on a thing would not only be not beneficial, but it could actually be reckless. It could be putting false information out that can make the situation worse for everyone involved. And it's not really bringing any honesty or transparency to the situation. So in a case like that, rather than just saying no comment, you want to give a specific reason why you can't answer that question now, and then give them a timeline for when you will be able to answer it, and then actually follow through on that. Because most people, they never do. If you can do that, it's going to make you a lot more trustworthy in the eyes of the public. And then we've got, I'm a, insert whatever title, right? I'm a medical expert. I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. I'm this, I'm that. You have to listen to me. You have to take my words at face value because I'm this type of expert. That is part of a logical fallacy called an appeal to authority. And it doesn't mean shit. You being an expert is completely irrelevant. You have to be able to demonstrate the reason behind what you're saying. And we saw this whole, expertise class really take a big hit, and deservedly so, during the whole COVID pandemic bullshit. All of the experts were just making everything up. Oh, this 6 feet to save lives, and put on a mask, even though the mask says that it doesn't stop viral transmission. You can go into a restaurant, but you have to wear a mask, but then you can go in and sit down next to each other and take off your mask, right? We walk one direction in grocery stores. Where did all these things come from? Well, we just pulled it out of our ass, they later admitted. And these are the experts, right? So because of that, a lot of people lost a lot of trust in the medical community. But this is more of a global thing, and it's always been an issue to a degree. You can't just rely on your credentials. People don't give a shit if you have a PhD. They don't give a shit if you're the, head of product development at Anthropic. They don't care what title you have. They care if you can articulate your point. So when I'm talking about publicity, I'm talking about public relations. I'm not just saying, hey, I'm a PR expert and you should just shut up and listen to me. You can't argue with me. If I'm making a statement about a particular thing, what I think you should do, what I think you shouldn't do, the best practices approach to various things, I don't just say, here's what you should be doing because I'm a PR expert. I say, here's what you should be doing, and here are the reasons why you should be doing it this way. When you can articulate the logic and the reasoning behind whatever it is you're saying, whether it's advice, whether it's warning, whether it's whatever, when you can articulate the reason behind it in a way that somebody outside of your industry can clearly understand, then you're showing up with real expertise. But when you're just leaning on a title or some kind of degree or certification or anything like that, you are not coming with any credibility. And in fact, you're actually hurting your credibility because people expect a legitimate expert to be able to articulate why they believe what they believe and why you should be following their advice and doing things their way. So it's critical that we don't overly rely on any kind of titles, any kind of certification, any kind of designation or anything like that. It's meaningless. It doesn't matter to anyone. Sure, it's a cool little, thing that you can get framed and stick up on your wall, and your mom's probably really proud of you. But outside of that, no one gives a shit about your credentials. And I see so many people make this mistake. One of my good friends, in fact, super smart guy, one of the best humans that I know. And he is constantly writing book after book after book after book after book as a kind of a credentialism thing, right? He wants this evidence to show that he's an expert rather than just talking about the principles, talking about how to do things, the right way to do things, why to do things a certain way. And so don't waste your time going down that path, because what will happen is you'll spend so much time trying to create these credentials that nobody gives a shit about that you're not actually doing the work. You're not actually proving through results that you know what you're doing. You look at somebody like Elon Musk, not a doctor, not a rocket scientist, right? He's not an engineer, but he is creating tremendous results, and the results speak for themselves. Doesn't give a shit about credentials, doesn't give a shit about a title. All that matters is the result. And, in his company, he's got a bunch of companies, but let's say SpaceX, for example. That company has made more advancements when it comes to rocketry and space travel and all that kind of stuff than our entire NASA program has in decades. That's the kind of evidence, the kind of proof that people are looking for. They're not looking for some fancy title. They're not looking for a certificate or a diploma. They're looking for real world results, because why else would they be hiring you? Why else would they be wanting to work with you or even following your content? They're doing that because they want a particular outcome, and your degree does not provide that outcome. The results are what provide that outcome. So you have to be able to demonstrate that. So that will lead us into today's Jeremy's PR PSA, which is that effective public relations requires a clear message that is crafted specifically to eliminate potential, my screen is blocking me here, to eliminate potential doubt in your message. So when you're making these statements, these things that I've told you guys not to say, when you're making these statements in a TV interview or a podcast interview for that matter, you're degrading the trust that you have, the authority that you have. So you want to avoid these so that not only are you providing great information, but you're also eliminating, as much as can be eliminated, the potential doubt that anyone may have in your message. When you're driven by the logics, the facts, the reason, the data behind what you're saying, you're going to come off as far more authoritative, far more credible, and far more trustworthy. And that's the key to making a media appearance create an impact for you. If you're creating impact through demonstrating your expertise, that piece then becomes a piece of content that demonstrates who you are and what value you bring to the people that you're potentially going to work with. And that's the key. So we want to avoid these 7 phrases, and there are more. We'll probably do another follow-up episode. I know I've done some of these topics in the past. There is a giant pile of things that you can say in an interview that will damage your credibility. So there probably will be a few more episodes on this topic, covering some of the other things that we didn't get a chance to cover today or in previous episodes. So guys, if you found this useful, I'd love it if you'd drop us a comment, particularly head over to YouTube, drop us a like and a comment there. If you're not already subscribed, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And if there's anyone you know who can benefit from what we've talked about here today, I would love it if you would share that with them so that they can get the value out of this and also create more impact in whatever it is they're trying to do. So that's going to be a wrap for today, guys. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And that's a wrap.